Snow erupted in white fountains all around them. The first burst walked across the valley floor in a line of geysers, chewing up the crusted surface and turning it into a storm of ice chips and powder. The second burst found metal and flesh. A snowcat, half-buried nose first in a drift where they'd parked it as a fallback, rang like a bell as rounds punched through its frame. A man screamed, high and sharp, then bit it back as he went down hard, a bloom of red spreading across his pant leg where it broke through the camouflage. "Contact right, right, right," someone yelled, voice snatched by the wind. The high mountain valley, so bright it hurt to look at just minutes earlier, suddenly felt like the inside of a rifle range. Muzzle flashes stitched through the tree line on the far slope and winked out among black rocks above them. A perfect L-shaped ambush, anchored on the ridge and the high pines, pouring lead into the white bowl where the SEAL patrol had been strolling a heartbeat ago. Chief Harris hit the deck in the snow and slid behind a hummocked lip of frozen earth, cursing into his radio. Viper 1 in contact, taking accurate fire from north and east. "Break, break, Viper Overwatch, talk to me." Static clawed back at him. Not even a broken syllable to ride on. Just dead, fat noise, buzzing in his ear. "Net's fried," he snapped, yanking the push-to-talk away from his face as if he could physically rip the jamming off the air. He looked up along the valley, eyes narrowing behind snow-flecked goggles. They hadn't just walked into random contact. They'd been funneled right into the center of a kill box. Another rip of automatic fire sliced across them. Snow spat up inches from his helmet. To his left, Diaz was on his back, teeth bared, face white beneath the brown as he worked a tourniquet around his own thigh. The leg of his pants was shredded, soaked through and redistributing its heat into the snow beneath him. "Hold still," the medic, Oakes, snarled, dropping to his knees beside him. His hands shook, but they moved fast and correct, cinching the strap, checking for distal pulse, already shouting for more gauze. Rounds popped the snow a meter past Oak's boot. He didn't flinch. "Fear later. Function now. Smoke out," someone yelled. Gray-green canisters arced up, disappearing into the brightness. A moment later they began to spew thick streamers that were immediately caught by the mountain wind. Instead of dropping in a neat curtain between the patrol and the tree line, the smoke billowed, twisted, came streaming back toward them in roiling sheets that erased what little visibility they had. 1 second they could see silhouettes in the trees. The next, they were in a choking cloud that hid everything but the violent flicker of muzzle flashes in the high ground. "Wind's wrong. Wind's wrong." Harris barked, but it was too late. The valley was a snow globe in a storm, full of lead. A deeper sound rolled over the rattling chorus of rifles, a chugging, almost rhythmic roar. The heavy machine gun on the ridge opened up in full, its traces stitching luminous orange lines across their world. Snow exploded in front of anyone who tried to crawl so much as a body length toward better cover. "Down, down!" Harris roared. "Everybody stay the hell down." They dug behind anything that would hold a body, the half-buried boulder in the valley floor, the bent, disabled snow vehicle, shallow scabs in the snow dug out by their own hands. It felt like hiding behind tissue paper. A round smacked into the snowcat's hood and ricocheted, winding off into the sky. Another slammed into its tire with a flat, final thud. They were pinned, and every man knew it. "Chief," called Noble from behind the boulder, voice ragged. "You seeing this? This is why we should have brought a real long gun. We got no eyes up there, man. No overwatch, no." His complaint dissolved in another burst of incoming, the heavy pouring hate down from the ridge. Sentences frayed when you could feel rounds passing by your ear. Harris swore under his breath. He knew Noble was right, in a way that twisted like a blade. He pressed his helmet into the snow and tried the radio again. "Viper Overwatch, this is 1. Radio check, radio check. Anyone up there? Talk." Static rolled over him, thick and distorted. Every time he released the key, he heard the distant, muffled thump of mortar fire somewhere beyond the ridge. They hadn't even seen the tubes yet. That was what scared him, what he couldn't see. Buried charges, pre-sighted guns, jamming, mortars warm and ready. None of this was improvised. Another scream cut through the valley as a round found someone's gear or flesh. They couldn't tell through the smoke. Diaz grunted, slackening for a second as the tourniquet locked on his leg. Oakes checked him, shouted something that sounded like "still with me," then pressed low, snow soaking through his gloves. A few bursts of return fire snapped up at the tree line, sharp and hopeful, but they were blind shots, trying to suppress a position they couldn't actually see. "Save the ammo," Harris ordered. "Short bursts. 2, 3 rounds only. We're not burning through mags on A." The enemy machine gun barked again, sending tracer lines across the valley. A chunk of rock splintered off the boulder inches from Noble's cheek. He spat snow and fear. "Yeah, Chief, totally fine. Totally good decision not to bring a sniper." The word hit Harris like a slap. For a moment he saw something else. Not the snow, not the valley, not the smoke. A cramped planning room in the forward operating base. This morning. A woman's voice, easy and calm. "Mind if I run a bolt gun instead?" The memory slid in sharp and bright. She'd been leaning in the doorway of the armory cage, hood down, dark hair twisted back under a beanie, shoulders compact under a white camouflage parka. On the table in front of her, the standard carbine assigned to her slot lay untouched. Behind her, the long rifle, heavy barrel, folded bipod, tall glass, rested on the rack. "Chief," she had said, in that same even tone, "if it's all the same, I'd rather sign out the bolt gun. I've got the logbook for it, and up there," she nodded toward the wall map where the contour lines bunched tight, "you're going to want someone doing work beyond 600. The room had gone quiet for a half-second. Then Rooster laughed, a barking, delighted sort of sound. "Come on," he had said, pushing away from the map board. "You see the way Intel marked this? It's basically a walk in the snow with an antenna check. You want to LARP a movie on top of that?" "Yeah," Noble chimed in. #mountain sniper. Tag us when you post the selfies." A few more voices piled on, good-natured but dismissive. Jokes about gun bunnies and filters, about people who like the idea of the distance more than the reality of the climb. Harris had raised a hand, cutting them off. The up timeline sat behind his eyes like a ticking clock. Weather, sat windows, the unknown about why the relay site had gone dark. He didn't have bandwidth for a last-minute weapon swap and rehearse. "We're not rewriting the playbook at H-hour -2, he'd said, tapping the mission folder. "You on the roster as a rifle, so you carry a rifle. We've got organic Overwatch on call. We stick with the plan." She hadn't argued, just a small nod, eyes dropping for the briefest moment to the long rifle on its rack. Then she picked up the carbine without a word, checked the mag, and walked out. Now, in the white noise of the valley, with the perfect ambush closing around them, Harris could taste the bitterness of that choice. The heavy gun roared again. Then another sound cut through everything. It was just one shot. One single, distant crack, almost polite compared to the roaring chaos. Its echo rolled down from somewhere above and slightly behind the ridge, bouncing off the rock like a question. The machine gun stopped mid-burst. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Harris blinked through the swirling smoke, listening. The roar that had been pinning them in place stuttered, choked, and then fell silent entirely. He risked a glance over the rim of his cover just in time to see the heavy's barrel dip and its gunner collapse sideways in a spray of kicked-up snow. Someone had just reached out from an impossible angle and flicked a piece off the enemy's board. "What the?" Noble whispered. On the tree-lined flank, an enemy spotter with binoculars was silhouetted against a darker trunk. He was shouting something down into the valley, turning his head, trying to figure out why the heavy had gone dead. He never finished the word. The second shot arrived like a delayed answer, another single crack, slightly different this time, followed by a small jerk of the man's body before he crumpled into the drift. Enemy fire stuttered. It didn't stop. There were too many rifles and too many positions for that. But its rhythm changed. Bursts shortened. Heads ducked. Someone was up there, picking key pieces out of their formation, and the mountain cell knew it. Harris found himself holding his breath, listening for that next crack, like a drowning man listening for a rope. His radio hissed again. For a second he thought it was more jammed noise. Then, threaded through the static, a new voice came in. Cleaner, quieter, on a different channel altogether. Viper 1, this is Glass, the voice said. Female, calm. Ridge, left bunker, 3 meters right of the smoke. Stand by. Harris's heart kicked. He swung his head toward Noble, who was already looking back at him, eyes wide. Glass. Noble mouthed. No way. That can't be. Left bunker, the voice repeated, unshaken, as if she were calling out range markers on a target range instead of an ambush. 3 meters right of the smoke. On my shot. Shift 1 team to the drainage ditch at your 10 o'clock. You've got 15 seconds between bursts. Noble spoke under his breath, disbelief and all fighting in his tone. That call sign's a myth, man. Stories. No way she's actually. The third shot broke across the valley. This time it hit something volatile. An enemy fighter at the tree line was just lifting an RPG tube to his shoulder, fumbling the weapon into place, intention written in every motion. The round caught the warhead as it came level, punching into its casing an instant before he could orient it down into the bowl. For a fraction of a second, the world held its breath. Then the warhead cooked off. The explosion tore up the snow around the shooter, or what was left of him, and threw 2 more fighters sprawling. A black smear of smoke clawed at the clean sky. Shot waves rolled down into the valley. Go! Harris roared, instinct seizing the gap the way muscles seize a ledge. Drainage ditch, move, move, move. Drag Diaz. Oaks, you're last. They slid and scrambled, half crawling, half falling, using their bodies to haul their wounded and drag the sled with the encrypted gear toward the shallow depression Glass had named. Behind them, fire resumed, but it was less coordinated now, the machine gun still and silent on the ridge. Snow scraped at their faces. The air tasted of cordite and cold metal. Above it all, somewhere in the high, blinding world, an unseen woman worked a bolt, watched, and calculated. An hour ago, they had laughed when she'd asked for a rifle. Now, every man in the valley moved when she said move. The day before the valley snapped shut, the mountains had looked almost soft. From the forward operating base, the ridgelines rolled away in layers of white and gray, each one a little fainter than the last. The base itself was a patchwork of shipping containers half buried in snowbanks, tent roofs sagging under drifts, and antenna masts rimed with ice. A snowplow idled near the gate, steam breathing from its exhaust in slow pulses. Inside the converted container that served as the briefing room, the air was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and gun oil. A digital map glowed on the front wall, the valley and its surrounding peaks rendered in shades of blue and white. Red circles marked sensor nodes. One blinked, yellow overlined with red, the relay site that had gone dark. Bottom line, said the intel officer at the front, tapping that blinking point with a gloved finger. We haven't had traffic out of this node in 12 hours. No storm big enough to justify that. No scheduled maintenance. No friendly units in the vicinity. It didn't just fall over on its own. He zoomed the map out. Linear icons popped up along the mountain border, representing other elements in the grid. This sensor net feeds early warning data for this entire sector. If it stays blind, we open a corridor. Noble shifted his weight on the bench, elbow nudging the operator beside him. Open corridor, he whispered. That's their polite way of saying front door for trouble. The intel officer pretended not to hear. Enemy activity in this AO isn't farmers and roadblocks. We're seeing a disciplined mountain cell, small elements, high mobility. They've probed our lines 3 times in the last month. They know where the sensors are. They've tried to spoof them. Now one goes dark. He looked around the room. My money. They want to blind the grid and grab anything useful. Crypto. Hardware. Operators if they get lucky. That's a propaganda coup plus a technical win. Chief Harris sat near the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He watched the map, not the officer. Watched the lines of altitude, the valley shapes. The relay site sat on a shoulder of rock at the head of a long bowl. The planned route in, marked in green, curved gently up the valley like a safe little hiking trail. Route as briefed yesterday, he asked. The operations major nodded. Standard approach up the valley. Sensor site secure. Confirm or replace the gear. Get out. Weather window is tight but doable. Overwatch is on call if needed. But SAT windows are the bigger issue. You'll have a comms blind spot for about 40 minutes on your exfil. Should be on the way down by then. Should be, Harris echoed quietly. In the back row, Lena sat with a notebook resting on her knee, the edge of it tucked into the cargo pocket of her snow pants. To anyone glancing, it looked like a generic hardcover field book. Up close, you'd see the pages were full, columns of numbers, wind calls, distances, sketches of ridges and rock formations. Years of cold places compressed into one worn object. Her cold weather parka made her shoulders look a little broader than they were. The hood lay down, revealing dark hair braided and coiled at the base of her skull. She watched the map, eyes moving from contour lines to the marker for the relay, then further up, past the route, past the site, to where the ridge sharpened into an almost vertical wall of blue. Someone asked a question about the possibility of booby-trapped equipment. Another cracked a joke about enemy propaganda videos and how ugly their own faces would look in low resolution. The room loosened a fraction. Any questions? The major said at last. Lena raised her hand. Yeah. His eyebrows went up. He'd nearly moved on. Go ahead. Tracks around that node? She asked. Recent imagery. Anything on approach patterns? The intel officer flicked through layers, adjusted contrast. Sparse. We've got satellite from 2 days ago, wind-blown tracks along the ridgeline. Nothing in the valley. Hard to tell. Fresh snow since then. She leaned forward slightly. And the antenna orientation. That made a couple of guys glance at each other. The officer zoomed in on the node marker. The image sharpened into a small metal structure, a mast like a stick figure against the snow. Last imagery shows the mast rotated a few degrees off what it was last month, he said. Probably nothing. Frost heave. Ice. Or someone bumped it while wiring in a piggyback, Lena murmured. He hesitated. Could be, he conceded. We don't have proof. Harris watched her from the side. She wasn't making a show. There was no attention-seeking in the way she asked questions. If anything, there was a reluctance, as if she'd prefer not to speak at all. But when she did, it was focused, pointed. After the brief, the room broke into the low-level chaos of prep. Men stood, stretched, checked gear lists. Outside in the corridor, racks of rifles waited under strips of lead light. The armory was a narrow container lined with weapons on both sides. Carbines, machine guns, grenade launchers. On the far wall, a shorter rack held 3 long rifles with heavy barrels and big scopes in dark mounts. Lena moved down the line, the carbine assigned to her already slung, the sling too tidy to belong to someone who'd just picked it up. Her hand brushed the stock of the nearest long rifle. The armor looked up from his log. You trading up? He asked, smirking. Requesting, she answered. I'm marked as designated marksman. That bolt gun's matched to my logbook. She pulled the notebook half out of her pocket, enough to show the serial on the inside cover. I know how it behaves in cold. Before the armor could respond, Chief Harris stepped in. Problem? He asked. Not yet, the armor said. She wants to sign out the long glass. Harris exhaled slowly. He thought of the briefing clock, the SAT window chart taped up in the TOC, the weather reports warning about incoming fronts. Weapon swaps weren't complicated, but they meant check fires, adjustments, verifying 0. Every new variable was another thing that could slip the schedule. Lena met his eyes without flinching. Chief, that valley's a funnel. If something's wrong at that node, they'll choose the high ground. You'll want someone who can reach out if they do. Rooster, leaning against the opposite rack, snorted. Heard this one before, he said. Ever notice how every marksman on loan thinks they're the main character? We're checking an antenna, not invading a country. Noble chuckled. Hey, let her have it, Chief. Maybe the cartel up there will be impressed by the aesthetics and give up. A couple of others joined in with quieter laughs. None of it was nasty, exactly. Just that easy derision that came when someone pushed against the plan. Harris raised a hand. Enough, he said. To Lena, he added, we've got Overwatch on call with a dedicated team. You and a rifle slot on this patrol. I'm not retooling the whole thing at the 11th hour. It wouldn't. He shook his head. No, we've gone through this. We stick with the plan. She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer. Then she nodded once, sliding the notebook back into her pocket. Roger, Chief. She picked up the carbine properly, racked it, and walked out. The long rifle stayed on the rack, quietly reproachful. The convoy rolled out into the mountains in a staggered line of tracked vehicles, engines growling under the weight of armor and gear. The snowcats clawed their way up narrow, scraped roads, snowplow blades pushing drifts aside like slow waves. Lena rode near the back, squeezed between cases of batteries and a coil of rope in the rear compartment of a snowcat. The others around her joked about warm food back home, about who owed who a beer when this was over. Their laughter rattled against the metal walls and thinned some of the tension. She kept her gloves off, fingers flexing around a pair of battered binoculars. The glass was scratched, but the edges of her world were still sharp through it. She studied the slopes as they passed, the way wind had scoured one side bare while leaving deep drifts in the lee of rock outcrops, the patterns of animal tracks, the absence of any others. Near one ridgeline, a series of blocks broke the surface of the snow, a line of rectangular cuts, too regular to be just wind. Snow bricks. Someone had built something there recently, then knocked it down, leaving only the base pattern. Farther on, she saw faint tracks angling up toward where she knew, from the map, the relay site Saturday. The tracks didn't meander like a hunter's or farmer's. They followed cover, moved from one fold of the terrain to another. Rehearsed. She lifted the binoculars to the distant relay mast, just visible as a thin slash of metal against the sky. Even from here, she could tell it was rotated slightly, like a weather vane that had been forced. See something? Noble asked, glancing over. The antenna's wrong, she said quietly. Tracks are wrong. It looks like a place someone's been practicing. He shrugged, turning back to his own view. Place has probably seen more mountain goats than fighters, he said. You stare at snow long enough, you see ghosts in it. She didn't answer. She let the binoculars hang, their strap biting into her neck, and let her mind flip through other mountains. Another valley, years ago, where she'd studied the folds of rock and snow and seen the same hints, patterns that said planned movement, not random. Back then, she'd voiced it, being told it was overthinking. The team had stuck to the charted route. The ambush had come, not as perfectly shaped as this one would, but close enough. There had been 3 black bags afterward, lined up in melting snow near a helicopter pad, zippers as straight as the firing line that had cut them down. She'd pulled 3 of those zippers closed herself. The memory flickered behind her eyes, a face, slack and waxen in death, framed by dark hair. She pushed it away, forcing herself to focus on the current route map taped to the snowcat wall. At the staging cabin, wood walls barely holding their own against the mountain air, they shook snow from their gear and went through the plan one more time. A plywood table held a crude sand table, piles of flour and sugar standing in for hills and valleys, matchsticks for trees, a small metal cylinder for the relay site. Lena traced an alternative route up the steep ice chute that skirted the valley, fingertips sliding along a nearly vertical approach. It was nasty ground, hard to move on and exposed to the wind. But from the top, you could see everything. Overwatch and insurance in one. Too exposed, the operations major said, shaking his head. You put people on that line. They're burning time and energy just getting there. And if the weather sucks and they're stranded. Valley approach is simple. In and out. Harris didn't argue. They were already committed. Later, as night pressed against the cabin windows and the generators hummed, the patrol settled in. Some guys slept, boots on, hands cradling weapons. Others cleaned rifles, the familiar motions a way to bleed off nerves. Lena sat on the edge of her bunk, the carbine propped against the wall. Within easy reach, on her lap, balanced in the spill of red light from a headlamp, the long rifle's logbook lay open. She held an invisible rifle, cheek pressing against air, finger brushing an absent trigger. She dry-fired in silence, working through the shot process, natural point of aim, breathing, gentle pressure. Her eyes flicked from the imagined reticle to the terrain map pinned to the wall. Ridge lines, the ice chute, the valley below. She could see, already, where someone might put a gun if they wanted to catch a patrol mid-stride with nowhere to go. She could see where she'd want to be to break that. She didn't sleep much. When she did doze, it was with the feeling of cold rock under her body and the weight of a rifle in her hands that she didn't yet possess. At first light, the valley was so beautiful it was almost offensive. The snow had a delicate crust, glittering where the low sun caught it. The sky was a burnt-out pale blue, so thin it felt as if it might crack. Breath hung in the air as little ghosts when they exhaled. They stepped off in a staggered file, crampons biting into the crust, rifles slung or held low. The sensor sight's mast was a tiny line ahead, barely a scratch on the horizon. The valley sides rose up on either hand, dotted with dark pines and bands of rock. Harris walked near the front, scanning. He could feel the weight of the terrain model in his head, the briefing points layered over what his eyes saw. The plan threaded up the center of the valley like a green line only he and the other planners could see. Lena moved slightly back from point, within easy distance of Diaz and Oaks. Her eyes kept drifting left, toward the dark slash where the ice chute cleaved the mountainside, deep in shadow, the snow there a different color, blue and harder. The route not chosen. The tension between what was written and what felt right tugged inside her with each step. At the valley's midpoint, someone called a short halt. They took a moment to breathe, to adjust packs, to look around. Lena let her gaze sweep the slopes again, from tree line to rock to the skyline. Her boot caught on something under the snow. She glanced down. A thin cord, barely visible, trembled where her crampon had brushed it. It wasn't taut enough to trigger anything. Whoever had set it had given it slack, or the wind had. But the cord led, faintly, up toward a half-buried post. Her gut clenched. "Chief," she called, voice low, already crouching to put a hand gently near the wire. "We've got—" A distant thump interrupted her. Not in the valley. Beyond it. Her mind recognized the sound even before the second and third followed, closer together, like a drum being rolled across the mountains. Mortars, she breathed. The first round landed a dozen meters off the tail of the patrol, burying itself a heartbeat before it went off. Snow erupted in a column, throwing men forward, gear tumbling. The second landed ahead, bracketing them. The third walked in closer, and this one found a body, taking the man off his feet and flinging him sideways. "Contact! Contact!" Harris roared, voice ripped by the concussive wave. "Take cover! Take!" The sides of the valley came alive. From the tree line on their right, muzzle flashes winked from behind trunks and snow walls. From the rocky shelf above them to the left, silhouettes leaned out from boulders and laid down fire, the recoil of their weapons sending small avalanches of powder off the rocks. The valley floor, moments ago a quiet corridor, was now a killing ground. Lena threw herself down behind a shallow roll of snow, carbine clutched against her chest. Rounds tore into the crust where she'd been a second before, sending shards of ice into the air. Upslope, both sides. Noble shouted, his voice high with adrenaline. "They got us boxed." Harris hit the radio. "Viper 1 in contact." Grid, the rest was swallowed by static. He switched channels, tried again. More static. It felt thicker, somehow, than the usual background hiss, almost oily. "Jammed," Lena shouted, rolling to see him. "They are running a jammer." He swore, then shouted over the din, "Pop smoke." Canisters went out, dragging tails of colored smoke. The wind grabbed them, shredding their cover, pushing it back into their faces. Within seconds, the valley floor was a chaotic blur of gray and green, men as faint shadows in a world of shifting fog. On the ridge, the heavy machine gun spoke for the first time, its voice a deep, drumming thunder. Traces laced through the smoke, finding bodies by luck and momentum alone. One line walked directly toward a fire team trying to sprint for the relative cover of a boulder. "Down!" Lena screamed, though they couldn't hear her. They'd dove anyway, self-preservation pulling them flat as the traces passed above, so close she could have believed she felt their heat. She crawled, belly to the snow, toward Diaz and Oaks. Diaz lay on his side, hand pressed to his thigh, red seeping between his fingers. Oaks was already there, kit open, pulling tourniquet and gauze with practiced movements. "Exit?" she asked. "Through and through," Oaks said, jaw tight. "Femur might be clipped. He's not walking out of here on his own." Diaz tried to grin. It came out as a grimace. "Told you I just wanted the day off," he rasped. "Keep talking," Oaks ordered. "Keeps you warm." A bullet snapped overhead, invisible but insistent. Harris crawled up behind a chunk of ice, panting. His mind ran through options as if flipping through laminated cards. Return fire uphill? Useless, they couldn't see past the smoke. Run forward? They'd be mowed down crossing the open. Fall back? The mortars would walk them into a pattern. "Hold what you've got," he shouted to anyone who could hear. "Stay low. We'll ride it out till the tube's cool. Then we move back the way we came." Lena heard him. The plan sounded reasonable on the surface. Textbook. Don't charge machine guns. Get out of the kill zone once the heaviest fire slackens. But looking up the valley, she could see more than the textbook. They'd been tracked on approach, announced by that wire under her boot, and probably others that had already sent signals uphill. Someone had rehearsed this. The mortars were bracketing them with uncomfortable precision, and the enemy rifles weren't aiming for the sled with the batteries and the encrypted gear. They were boxing it, guarding its approaches. "They're not trying to destroy the gear," she shouted, more to herself than anyone else. "They want it intact." She lifted her carbine, peering through the optic toward the ridge. Through gaps in the smoke, she caught a glimpse of a smaller shape near the heavy gun. A box, cables snaking down, a short antenna poking up like a weed among rocks. There! The jammer. From where she was on the valley floor, putting a round into it would be like throwing gravel against a tank. Angles were wrong. Distance too much for her stubby carbine. And even if she got lucky, she'd be exposing herself to the heavy. Another mortar fell, closer this time. The blast picked up a wall of snow and flung it over them. A chunk of ice the size of a fist smashed into her shoulder, numbing it. She gritted her teeth and pressed lower, snow soaking through her sleeves. Her eyes went to the left again, to where the valley narrowed toward the source of the ice chute. From here, it looked impossibly steep, a vertical gash in the mountainside. The route no one wanted. That line in her memory from the other mountain, the black bags, the ignored warning, pressed hard against the inside of her skull. "Obey, and watch this play out. I'll break the plan, and maybe save them." A bullet smacked into the snow inches from her face, snapping her out of the thought. "Chief," she called, raising her head enough that he could see her mouth as she shouted. "We sit here." They tightened the net. "We've got wounded, a jammed net, and a valley with no exit." "Working on it," he shouted back, face pale beneath the streaks of grime. Another burst of fire tore into the snowcat behind him. A round hit her carbine's optic with a sharp crack. The glass spiderwebbed, and the force knocked the weapon from her hands into the snow. She cursed and grabbed for it, fingers closing around the barrel. The optic housing was cracked along one side. The reticle danced, no longer trustworthy. Of course, she thought. Add that to the list. She rolled onto her side, cradling the carbine, and looked up toward the ice chute again. Snow had started to fall now, lazy flakes drifting down, softening the world's edges. In half an hour, contrast would degrade. In an hour, maybe less, visibility could be gone. It didn't have an hour. Lena pressed her helmet back into the snow and made her choice. She pushed up onto her elbows and crawled toward Harris, keeping as low as humanly possible, every movement deliberate, grazing the surface like a swimmer skimming a pool's bottom. "Chief," she shouted, stopping just close enough that they could huddle behind the same hunk of snow. "I can get above them." He looked at her like she'd suggested sprouting wings. "Ow," he demanded. "The ice chute." She jerked her chin toward it. "I climb, stripped down to essentials. I'll be on their ridge in 20 minutes if I move. From there, I can work their heavy spotters, that jammer. You'll have lanes. That route's not on the plan." He shot back automatically. "We're not." Another mortar landed close enough to make the ground buck under them. Diaz groaned somewhere behind, a choked sound. Harris grabbed at the snow with a gloved hand, as if he could hold the earth still. He wanted to say no, wanted to wrap both hands around the plan and squeeze until it stopped writhing. But plans were paper, and this valley was not. "How many rounds you carrying?" he asked. She thought fast. 6 mags carbine, 1 box for the long gun. He looked at her optics cracked housing. "That scope's toast. Usable. I can burn rounds to re-approximate 0 once I'm up. I know the distances now." He stared at her for a long breath, the battle noise dulling around the edges as his focus narrowed. The woman who'd asked for a bolt gun. The notebook. The way she'd read the ridges in the briefing. "You're asking me to cut you loose alone," he said. "I'm asking you to let me do the job you brought me here for," she replied. "If I'm wrong, you're down 1 shooter. If I'm right, you get your valley back." A mortar screamed overhead, the whistle like someone dragging a knife along the inside of his skull. "Fine," he snapped. "You've got 20 minutes. You're on your own up there." Her eyes tightened for a moment in something that might have been relief or fear. Maybe both. She nodded once. "Make him count," he added. She slid away without another word, keeping to the folds of the terrain, using every dip and rise the valley offered. She shed gear as she went, ditching everything she couldn't justify. Extra magazines, spare radio batteries, even her pack. Weight was time, and time was bleeding out into the snow with Diaz. At the edge of the creek, she dropped into the shallow cut where the ice had split and refrozen, using it as a low, winding trench. Enemy fire hissed overhead. Snow and ice clattered into the channel around her. She kept her head down and her hands moving. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next boot placement. By the time she reached the base of the chute, her breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. The chute reared up above her, a narrow, shadowed gully of ice and packed snow, walls close enough that the wind turned it into a funnel. Spindrift poured down its center like the ghost of a waterfall. She paused long enough to strap on the micro-crampons hanging from her belt. The metal teeth bit into the soles of her boots, promising purchase on surfaces that would otherwise be death. Her radio hissed at her hip, jammed into uselessness. In here, between these walls, the world outside might as well have been on another planet, separated not by meters but by fate. She dug one gloved hand into the ice, the other finding a promising hold higher up. She drew in a breath that tasted of frost and metal and fear. Then she began to climb. The first 20 meters were all about trusting her gear. Axes in, feet set, weights centered. The chute's ice was brittle in places, solid in others. Too shallow an angle, and her crampons smeared uselessly. Too aggressive a kick, and she risked blowing out a foothold and peeling. Spindrift found every gap in her jacket, poured down her collar like ice water. The wind funneled up the gully, a low, constant howl that drowned out everything else. Her right crampon wobbled. She felt it before she saw it, a fractional shift in the way her weight distributed. A traitorous dragging sensation when she lifted her foot. Not now, she thought. She found a shallow depression just big enough to tuck into. Body pressed against the ice, axes sunk deep above her. With one hand, she fumbled for the offending strap. It had come loose, the buckle worked half open. Metal against metal made it impossible to simply cinch it tighter without thinking. She fished a length of paracord from a pocket, fingers already numbing despite the glove. Working by feel, she wrapped the cord through the crampon's frame and around her boot, tying it off in a simple knot that was more about friction than elegance. In the valley below, mortars boomed. Hey, the sound was filtered, distant, like a storm heard from behind walls. When the knot felt secure, she tested the crampon against the ice. It held. "Better," she whispered to herself. "Stay with me." She pushed up again. Halfway, the chute forced her onto a rock band that cut across the ice. The stone was cold and rough under her gloved fingers. It offered more secure holds and a different set of dangers. The run out below, if she slipped here, was nothing but hard ice and exposed rock. She wouldn't stop until she met something that didn't move. She hung for a moment, base of her glove palm pressing into a depression worn smooth. It wasn't natural. She looked closer. The rock bore scars, little crescents of metal where someone had hammered in pitons and removed them. A scuffed smear on an edge where a boot had slid. Old chalk, almost invisible now. The enemy had been here. The same someone who'd cut the snow blocks and set the wires. They climbed this route, practiced it, maybe placed shooters on the ridge above as part of their rehearsals. Of course they had. You didn't design a kill box like the one below without walking every line into and out of it. Her throat went dry. That meant they might be up here now, or close. Watching, waiting for someone, anyone, to make the exact move she was making. She forced her focus tight. Hand, foot, shift. One move at a time. The churn of fear in her gut was familiar now, an old companion. It pushed stories into her head if she let it. The other mountain, the other route she'd identified, the mission commander's polite dismissal. Too much risk for a maybe, he'd said then. She'd obeyed. The ambush had come from exactly where she'd predicted. She'd killed 4 that day from a precarious overwatch. But not before 3 of her own had gone down. Afterward, someone in another unit had jokingly called her glass, the way she could see the fight before it started. The name had stuck without the joke. The guilt had stuck harder. Now, fingers were inside her gloves. She chose differently. Her breathing turned into a metronome. Inhale, move, exhale, set. She kept the image of Diaz's blood in the snow at the forefront of her mind. No more bags. Not like that. Not for this. Near the top, the chute opened a fraction, the blue-black walls giving way to a narrower throat of snow. Above, she heard sharper sounds, the crack of individual rifles, shouted orders in a language she understood just enough to know urgency. The enemy hadn't expected a threat from here. Yet, she eased up to just below the lip and pressed herself flat, letting only her eyes clear the edge. The world flipped around her. The valley lay spread out below, a bowl of smoke and movement. The patrol were tiny flecks of color against white, scattered and huddled behind whatever cover they'd managed. The sled with the gears sat in a shallow depression, still intact, enemy rounds bracketing it like stakes in the ground. To her left, on the ridge, the heavy machine gun nest hunkered behind a built-up parapet of snow and rock. The gun sat mute, barrel cooling, its crew crouched low, gesturing wildly as they argued about what had just killed their leader. Farther along the ridge, tucked into a rock shelf, she spotted the enemy sniper. Rifle rested on a pack, scope scanning for threats that were, until now, only imagined. His gaze was down and outward, never up and back. On a knoll between ridgeline and valley, the mortar spotter knelt, binoculars up, hand cupped to a field radio at his ear as he called corrections. Near the heavy, half hidden behind a slab of rock, the jammer's box hummed softly, its stubby antenna angled toward the valley like an accusation. And moving among them, barking orders, gesturing with practiced authority, was a man with a headset around his neck and a field radio handset in his hand. The commander. She let her cheek rest against cold rock and felt, deep in her bones, the click of alignment. The board, the pieces, the pattern. Everything at once. She eased back, found a depression in the snow there, a shallow hollow carved by the wind, that gave her just enough space to lay prone. She dug her elbows in, settled the carbine in front of her, and looked through the cracked optic. The reticle was off, its center drifting. The earlier hit had knocked the zero. She drew in a breath. Burn too, she thought. Get the correction. Pay now or pay when it matters. She picked a patch of rock at the same estimated distance as the heavy gun, an innocuous, unfriendly slab with no value except that it was there. With the optic sent on its left edge, she squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked in the narrow space, the recoil pushing back into her shoulder. The round struck the rock a handbreadth right of where she'd aimed, kicking up a small puff. She adjusted mentally. Again. Second shot. Another puff. A little low now, but closer. She ran the corrections in her head. Offset by this much right, this much up. Imperfect, but workable. Her box of wasted rounds was smaller now. She slid the carbine a fraction, settled in behind it. The air around her felt very still for a moment, despite the distant violence. Her radio hissed uselessly at her side. Down below, in the jammed net, Chief Harris and the others were still deaf. Up here, alone on the ridge, she had no one to talk to but the glass between her eye and the world. She started building her list. First, the enemy sniper. Always start with the eyes that can see you back. She found him again, nestled against his rock shelf, scanning the valley in practice sweeps. He had no idea that death had climbed in behind him. She exhaled slowly, let the reticle settle a little off where instinct told her it should. Factoring the damage 0, the wind she felt more than saw, the distance she'd studied last night. On the half-breath between inhale and exhale, she pressed. The shot reached him a lifetime away. Through the optic, she saw a small, neat jerk of his body, the sudden slackness as he folded forward onto his rifle. No flailing drama, just a light turned off. One eye of the ambush closed. She shifted. Next, the mortar spotter. He was still on his knoll, turning, shouting into his radio, gesturing down the valley. The tubes themselves were behind a fold of ground she couldn't see, but without him, they would fire blind. She tracked the binoculars, the radio, the way he turned his head. Her finger found the trigger brake again. Another crack. Another answer far away. The spotter's binoculars flew from his hands as he went over backwards, arms splaying. Down below, mortar rounds began to fall with less cruel precision, their pattern scattering. Tubes without eyes. In the valley, Harris glanced up at the ridge, surprised at the change. Heavy assets were going quiet in sequence. This wasn't chance. Somebody's working for us, Noble muttered, half to himself. Somebody with reach. Use it, Harris snapped, instinct catching on the pattern. Next lull, we move. Get ready. On the ridge, Lena flicked her gaze back to the heavy gun nest. Its crew were rattled now, heads ducking, their body language jerky. The gun itself still sat in its perfect lane, barrel pointed down into the valley, a scythe waiting to swing. She lined up on the gunner. The cracked optic tried to lie to her. She ignored it, listening instead to the internal math she'd been doing since she started the climb. The first shot took the gunner cleanly, folding him into the parapet. The second, quickly racked and sent, found the assistant as he reached for the grips in reflex. The heavy's voice died before it could find a new throat. In the valley, the absence was immediate and massive. A pressure lifted from the air. Now! Harris roared. Move, move, move. Drainage ditch. On me. Drag him. They surged, using the moment, bodies low, boots punching into the snow. Oakes and another operator grabbed Diaz and the sled's tow lines, hauling them with a desperate, awkward grace. Up on the ridge, the mountain cell realized something was wrong. Too many key positions had gone quiet too quickly. Fighters shouted at each other, some waving weapons toward the ridge behind them, others toward the valley. An order went up. A small quadcopter drone, painted dull white, lifted off from behind a rock and buzzed skyward, its rotors whining. Lena's jaw tightened as she saw it. Of course they had a drone. Of course they'd adapt. She swung the optic toward it, following its climb. The drone wobbled in the faint gusts, angling toward her side of the ridge. It was small enough that at this distance, putting a bullet into it was like threading a needle in a windstorm. She tracked its path, drew in a breath, and sent around, not at its center, but a hair ahead, where she judged its shaky momentum would carry it. The shot clipped a rotor blade. The drone lurched, spinning drunkenly, then tumbled into the snow on the opposite slope, disappearing in a puff. The shot's origin, however, was not invisible. Fighters on the ridge jerked their heads toward the sound. At least 2 sets of eyes fixed on her section of rock and snow. She heard the shouted orders, the words for up and shoot and climb clear even over the distance. The enemy knew their own approach routes. They knew this joke. She pressed her cheek back into the stock. The list in her mind reshuffled. The world had decided to hunt back. Jammer next, she thought. Before they take this perch away from me, make sure the net below can hear again. She shifted her aim toward the box near the heavy's nest. Most of it was shielded by rock, just a sliver of casing and the stub of its antenna visible. Her first line of fire would hit stone. She looked for a gap, a narrow, dark slice where rock didn't quite meet snow. There, a hand width at most. She waited through 3 heartbeats, letting her body calm down. Then she threaded the shot through that gap. For a second, nothing happened. Then the jammer's casing sparked. Smoke drooled out of its seams. The stubby antenna twitched, then toppled. Down in the valley, Harris's radio, dead and useless seconds ago, crackled into sudden clarity. Viper 1, this is Overwatch. We see you in contact. Repeat, we see you. Sit rep. Harris froze, then slammed his hand onto his push-to-talk. Overwatch, Viper 1. Troops in contact. Multiple casualties. Enemy on both ridges and tree line. Jamming just died. Unknown friendly shooter up high. We're bound for drainage ditch at grid. Copy, Viper 1. QRF spinning up. Stay alive. Lena heard none of it through her own still-jammed net, but she didn't need to. She'd seen the spark. She trusted physics. Behind the ridge, boots scraped on rock. Metals bit into ice. The climbers were coming. On a different frequency, somewhere far enough away that the ambient noise sounded different. Another voice spoke. Glass, this is Talon Actual, it said. We've got your ridge on satellite. Confirm that's you up there. Her shoulder twitched at the call sign. Her hand moved to her radio by reflex, though she knew it had been half-blind until a second ago. Static cleared like fog lifting. Affirm, she answered, voice steady despite the ice in her lungs. Glass on the ridge. Work in progress. We see that, the distant voice said. Nice work. Confirm eyes on enemy commander. Down on the valley floor, Harris and Noble both heard that on their now clear net. They stared at each other. Glass. Noble repeated. His tone was reverent now. The jokes burned out of him. No way. That glass. Shut up and shoot, Harris snapped, but his own eyes betrayed a flash of something like recognition. The myth had a voice, and it was the same voice that had asked him, calmly, for a rifle. On the ridge, Lena scanned back across the enemy formation. The commander stood near the mortar tubes now, headset on, field radio in hand, gesturing toward the sensor sights marker and the valley both. He was trying to salvage the plan, reorient his fighters, push some of them toward the relay for a last-ditch attack. She saw his mouth shape the words for push and grab and go. If he reached that site, and if even one fighter got footage of a burning relay and dead operators, the enemy would have what they wanted, propaganda and proof they could blind the grid. She let her eyes settle on him. Her world narrowed to the tiny movements of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, the way the wind plucked at the edge of his jacket. She could feel the wind on her own cheek as well, subtle but present, coming down the ridge at a slight angle. She imagined how it would push the round over the distance between them. She slowed her breathing until each inhale and exhale took up all the space in her awareness. Eyes on commander, she said into her MIC. Talon copies, came the reply. On your shot, Viper 1's moving hard for exfil. Make it count, glass. Fear flared again in her chest, a bright, sharp thing. She didn't push it away. She let it sit, acknowledged it, then folded it carefully and placed it in the corner of her mind. Function on top. She pressed, gently. The crack reached the valley a fraction of a second after the round went through the air. Through the scope, she saw the commander jerk as if someone had yanked on an invisible string. The handset flew from his fingers. He went down, legs folding, body crumpling into the snow in a posture that could not be mistaken for anything but final. For a heartbeat, everyone around him froze. Fighters half-crouched, some mid-stride, some midway through shouting orders. The silence that followed was not complete. Rifles still barked, men still screamed. But something fundamental in the cadence changed. The coherent rhythm of the ambush fractured. On the valley floor, Harris heard the single shot. He saw the confusion ripple through the enemy positions, movement stuttering. He didn't know who exactly had just gone down up there, but he knew an opening when he saw one. That's our door, he yelled. All elements. Push. Get to that spur, now. They ran. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't a sprint, either. They kept low, using whatever cover the valley could offer. The drainage ditch gave them a shallow, winding track to follow, its banks shielding them from some of the lateral fire. Oakes and another operator hauled Diaz between them, his boot leaving a dragging groove in the snow. A third man pulled the sled with the gear, the tow rope biting into his harness. Enemy fire continued, but the bursts were less coordinated now, more sporadic. Without the commander's shouted corrections and the mortar spotters' calls, they were fighting in fragments. On the ridge, Boots scrambled closer. Lena heard one climber curse as his axe slipped, then bite again into the ice. Another barked something about up fast, up fast. She couldn't stay where she was and fight a close-in battle with a carbine at bad angles. That wasn't the kind of fight she'd come up here to make, and she hadn't finished the list yet. The RPG team she'd glimpsed earlier, moving through the trees on the near side of the valley, had finally reached a position where they could see most of the bowl. They set up behind a log, one man cradling the tube, the other fumbling with a round. Her optic found them and held. The helicopter would come soon. QRF, extraction, she didn't know which yet. But when it did, the tube would look for it like a magnet looked for iron. Not today, she whispered. She put the next round through the man holding the launcher. He dropped, tube clattering. The assistant stayed in shock, then dove for cover, leaving the weapon where it lay. Metal scraped rock behind her. A climber reached the top of the chute, breath ragged. She heard the crunch of his boots on the ridge, the rasp of fabric on snow. She rolled sideways, abandoning her perfect little nest. 2 rifle shots chewed into the snow where she'd lain a heartbeat before. She came up behind a boulder, using its bulk to break line of sight. Her lungs burned. The carbine felt heavier in her hands now, as if the weight of every round she'd fired so far had nested in the receiver. "Glass, this is Overwatch," came the distant voice again. "Bird is inbound to exfil point. 2 mics out. Viper 1 is moving. Hold what you can." "Working it," she answered, voice clipped. The first climber rounded the boulder's edge, rifle at his shoulder. His eyes widened as he saw her, closer than he'd expected, and in that microsecond of surprise she was already moving. She snapped the carbine up and fired a single hurried round. At this range, the optics cracked and the wind mattered less. The round took him center mass, knocking him back, his boots skidding on blood and ice. The second climber shouted, pulling back, using the rock's edge as cover. She heard him slide to a different angle, trying to flank. This wasn't her game, not on this slope. She backed toward the side of the ridge opposite the chute, using the boulder to cover her retreat. Her boots found the lip of another gully, narrower and steeper, full of soft snow that had slumped off the ridge over time. She holstered her fear again and let herself fall into it, turning the drop into a controlled slide. Snow roared around her as she plunged, using boots and elbows as improvised rudders, steering away from exposed rock. A shot snapped above, then another, but the angle was bad for the climber. He'd have to choose between chasing and not falling to his own death. She rode the gully for what felt like forever and no time at all, spat out at a lower ledge that curved around the mountain like a shelf. From there she could see, at a skewed angle, the makeshift landing zone that Overwatch had designated on the far side of the valley, a flat clearing where the snowcats had once turned around. The helicopter came in low and hard, its rotor wash grabbing at the snow, whipping it into a spinning halo. It flared, skids kissing the crust, side door already open. Viper 1 surged toward it, a ragged, determined cluster. Harris were at the front, Noble beside him, Oakes and the others lugging Diaz and the sled. Enemy rounds snapped after them, some finding nothing but air, a few punching into the snow around their boots. Without the heavy in the eyes, the fire was dangerous but not yet decisive. Lena crawled to the ridge edge, propped the carbine against a rock, and put 2 more rounds into a cluster of fighters who were forming up near the tree line, trying to push a last volley into the exfil point. They scattered. "Last man!" Someone screamed near the helicopter, voice lost in the rotor thunder. Diaz was lifted in like a sack of grain, Oakes following, hands bloody but steady. The sled was shoved in, its precious cargo banging against the doorframe. Harris did a headcant in the space of a breath, then hauled himself inside. Noble slapped the side of the bird twice, the universal signal. Up, 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 he yelled. The helicopter's pilot didn't need the encouragement. The bird surged, skids leaving the snow, engine straining. It clawed its way into the air, snow cascading off its belly. Lena watched it climb, watched the way the enemy fighters below lifted their rifles and fired futilely at it, their rounds falling short or bouncing off armor. For a second, she let herself just watch, the sense of relief like a warm wave cresting and then breaking. Then her training snapped back. She scanned the tree line again. The RPG tube lay where she'd dropped its handler, but a new set of hands grabbed for it, frantic. A terrified-looking fighter fumbled for a round, eyes fixed on the ascending helicopter. Not today, she said again, almost gently. She took one last carefully placed shot. The round reached him a heartbeat before his own finger reached the trigger. The tube tumbled from his hands, launcher and warhead both disappearing into the snow as he went down. The helicopter cleared the ridge, banking away. From her vantage point, Lena could see it shrink against the sky, a black insect moving toward the safer distance. Her shoulders sagged. The adrenaline that had held her up until now seeped away, leaving a deep, throbbing exhaustion in its place. Glass, this is Talon. The distant voice came one more time. Viper 1 is aboard. Minimal KIA. Gear intact. You did good work up there. She closed her eyes for a second. The other mountain rose in her memory. Bags, zippers, the cold weight of failure. Then it receded, replaced by the image of Diaz's pale face on the helicopter, alive. Copy, she replied. Request exfil path. Negative immediate, Talon said. Enemy still active in your vicinity. Hold position. Move back on your own route when able. We'll paint you lanes. Of course. Alone again. She smiled without humor, shifted the carbine on her back, and turned to start the long, careful descent down a different line, one that would thread between enemy positions without touching any more wires. The mountains watched without comment. The base's medical bay was a container with its guts ripped out and replaced with cot after cot. The air inside was too warm, too full of disinfectant and metallic tang. Diaz slept under a thin blanket, leg wrapped in layers of bandage and padding. Tubes snaked from his arm to bags hanging from a pole. Each rise and fall of his chest was a small victory. Harris stood at the foot of the cot, helmet dangling from his hand. Noble leaned against the wall, arms folded, a bruise forming along his jaw where a ricochet had kissed him. Neither man spoke for a long time. In the debrief room, a tablet glowed on a scarred table. The operations colonel swiped through intercepted chatter, satellite imagery of the valley before and after. The sensor relay site's mast stood intact in the latest shot, its orientation corrected by the maintenance team that had flown in on the second bird. The plan was simple, the colonel said, not unkindly. They wanted to blind us here, he pointed at the mast. The gear if they could, or at least put on a show. Parade some of you on video, burn the relay, show the world they could slap us in the face and walk away. Would have been worth a lot to them. He tapped another image, an infrared overhead of the ridge. Several heat signatures lay cooling where the heavy, the mortar spotter, and the commander had been. Others moved away in ragged lines. The loss of their commander and jammer, plus keeping the gear intact, sets them back, he said. They're not done. Cells like that never are. But this was a big swing for them. They missed. He looked up at Harris. Because someone broke the plan. Harris didn't flinch. She saw what we didn't, he said simply. Why didn't let her show me, back at the armory? The colonel's gaze shifted to Lena, who sat straight-backed in the chair across the table. Her hands rested on her knees. Her uniform was still damp in places where snow had soaked through and melted. Her hair, now loose, hung in a dark, tangled line down her back. He swiped to another page. Her personnel file. Highlights of previous deployments. Mountain phases. Instances where her assessments have been marked as noted but not implemented. You've been busy in the cold parts of the world, he said. More than I think some of us realized. She shrugged one shoulder, the motion tight. I go where they tell me. That other incident, he said, tapping a line on the screen. 3KIA, High Valley, Ridge Ambush. You recommended an alternative Overwatch route that wasn't used. Lena's fingers tightened just enough on her knees that the knuckles whitened. Yes, sir, she said. Same pattern. She nodded once. Similar. Not as clean. They were learning then. And today? Today they finished the lesson, she said. They rehearsed the valley, wired their alerts, built their guns high. They assumed we'd take the simple route because that's what we do when we think we're just checking a box. The colonel studied her. When did they start calling you Glass? He asked. Different unit, she said. Different mountain. He raised an eyebrow at the omission, but he let it pass. Around here, that call sign's been a ghost story for a while. The sniper who sees things before they happen. Woke a few people up when your voice came over the net. She said nothing. Legends were always louder than the people inside them. In your own words, he said, switching back to his debrief script. Describe your actions from contact to exfil. She did, in short, precise sentences. She described the wire at her boot, the mortar brackets, the heavy on the ridge. She laid out the climb step by step, talking through crampons and paracord and piton scars without embellishment. She ran through her target ladder, sniper, spotter, heavy, jammer, commander, RPG team. She called her shots standard corrections. She did not mention the moment on the rock face when fear had wrapped itself around her lungs. That wasn't relevant to the debrief. She did not talk about the weight of the other mountain, standing behind this one like a shadow. That wasn't in the checklist either. When she finished, the colonel sat back. Deviations from plan are usually what keep me up at night, he said. This one I'll take. He signed something on the tablet, then pushed it aside. You'll put in for whatever hardware they decide to pin on you, he added. I don't care about that. What I care about is that next time you say the snow looks wrong, more people listen. Harris's lips moved in something that might have been agreement or self-reproach. The debrief ended. Papers were signed. Formal words exchanged. Outside, in the narrow alley between containers, the cold hit harder. The wind had picked up, pushing fine snow along the packed ground, scraping it against metal walls. Lights glowed behind frost-fogged plastic. Lena stepped out, letting the air bite at her face, the silence seep into her ears. Hey, a voice called from behind. She turned. Harris stood there, helmet under his arm. In his other hand, held a little awkwardly, was the long rifle from the armory. Its barrel and receiver were clean now, the glass polished. The logbook lay tucked under his wrist. He walked up and held it out to her. Took some convincing to sign this out without the usual stack of paperwork, he said. Figured you'd have less trouble. She looked at the rifle for a moment, then at him. You remember this morning, he went on. Armory, me quoting the plan at you. I remember, she said. I've been in a lot of rooms where someone wants to be the sniper because it looks cool in pictures, he said. I put you in that box, and that's on me. He hesitated, then added, when I heard Glass on the net, I thought I was hallucinating. Figured that was one of those names people make up in bars. Turns out she was on my manifest. He offered the rifle again, more firmly. Next time you are asked to carry a bolt gun, he said, and I give you hassle, you have permission to remind me of this day in very colorful language. A small, involuntary laugh escaped her. It felt strange in her chest after so much clipped speech. I'll keep that in mind, she said, taking the rifle. It settled into her hands with the familiar weight of something long missing. He nodded, looked down, then back up. For what it's worth, he said, we'll make it home because of what you did. That's not nothing. She met his eyes. There was no ceremony there, no polished citation language. Just simple truth. The mountains did most of the work, she said quietly. I just watched. He frowned slightly, not quite following. She gestured with her chin toward the faint outline of the peaks beyond the base walls. They don't care who pulls the trigger, she said. They don't care whose name's on the op order. They just sit there and tell the same story they've always told. Some people listen. Most don't. He followed her gaze. I'll try listening more, he said. He left her then, boots crunching away on the icy ground. She moved to the edge of the base, where a short berm of snow and date marked the boundary. Beyond it, the landscape stretched out, flat at first, then rising again toward dark shapes. Steam curled from the mug in her hand, coffee gone lukewarm. The long rifle rested against the wall beside her, bolt open, the logbook tucked between stock and barrel. Snow began to fall again, small flakes drifting down at a lazy angle, settling on her shoulders and in her hair. Somewhere far above, she could hear the distant thrum of rotors, other birds, other missions. Voices echoed faintly from inside the base. Laughter, the clatter of dishes, the normal sounds of men who had faced death and now needed ordinary noise to push it back. She stood slightly apart, not by design but by habit. The cold pressed in. The mountains watched. Her legend, under the name others had given her, would grow. Stories would spread. About the sniper who silenced a ridge, who climbed an ice chute alone, who threaded a bullet through a gap the width of a hand. Men would tell them louder than she ever could. She sipped her coffee, eyes on the place where the valley she'd nearly died and lay hidden beyond the first line of hills. The snow that would already be covering their tracks, softening the craters, filling the footprints on the chute. The killed box would disappear under a new coat of white, its lines present only in memory and in her notebook. The mountains didn't care, but she did. And the next time she saw snow blocks cut too straight, tracks too rehearsed, antennas rotated a little wrong, she'd speak. Maybe this time, more people would listen. Until then, she would stand her quiet watch, rifle at her side, glass ready, eyes open.